Hi, this is Kelsey Fakowski with your AP Gov Review, and in Chapter 2, Part 2 of Constitutional Underpinnings, we're going to look at how the Constitution became the way that we know and respect it today. In Part 1, we looked at the problems associated with the Articles of Confederation, and in Part 2 today, we're going to look specifically at the Constitutional Convention and some of the structure that comes along with it. So, the Constitutional Convention is going to be comprised of 55 men from 12 of the 13 states. One state holding out is Rhode Island, very much afraid of this Constitutional Convention eroding its state's sovereignty, meaning to control its own affairs and have a say in the national government. So Rogue Island, as it was known at that time, is actually going to boycott the Philadelphia Convention at this point. But if you look at the demographics of those who attend, they typically are from the more upper echelon of society. You have wealthy planters, you have wealthy merchants, you even have some who are college graduates. That was very much unheard of within the general populace. So the delegates who are coming here are selected from the state legislatures. They are not, for the most part, your common average day people. Typically, these were people from the city areas. So if you recall from previous lectures, when we were talking about the three main theories of American democracy, pluralism, hyperpluralism, or the class elite theory, which view would this support? You would undoubtedly be inclined to say the elite or class theory, since this is not necessarily representing everybody during the Constitutional Convention, although the structure, you can argue, was very pluralistic. Now, during the Philadelphia Convention, they agreed to talk about four main topics. The first one being human nature. How do you prevent people in government from not acting out of their own self-interest? Because by human nature, the delegates believed that humans were just naturally inclined to benefit themselves. The second main topic was political conflict. They wanted to eliminate factions, but is that possible to do? And we look today with our political parties, which is a faction between the Democrats and Republicans, and certainly see how those factions at some time can create some problems. It can also create policy gridlock. So that is what they're sort of looking to avoid. In addition, they're looking to preserve property. Never did we see this more during Shays' Rebellion, when the national government could not put down this rebellion, and there was just this general fear that property would not be respected, that property would be destroyed. So certainly for the delegates, this is something that they're going to be concerned about. And the final topic that they agreed to talk about is how do you prevent factions from dominating and overwhelming another faction? They want to make sure that in some ways it is a pluralistic democracy. So these are the four main topics that they're going to be getting into. Now, another issue that they're going to be looking at, equality. How do you represent the states fairly? Of course, smaller states such as New Jersey at this time believed in equal representation, similar to the Articles of Confederation, where every state got one vote regardless of population. Virginia, on the other hand, which looked at mainly population-based representation, where the more people you have in your state, the more representatives you get, was favored, of course, again, by bigger states. So it really put the big and small states against one another. Ultimately, this is going to be hammered out in the Connecticut, or otherwise known as the Great Compromise, where you're going to have a bicameral legislature. That's very important, a bicameral, meaning two houses. You're going to have one house that's going to be based on state population, similar to what Virginia wants, and then you're going to have another house that's going to comprise of the Senate, which is going to be elected by each state legislature. So every state is going to get two senators that will be comprised of the Senate, regardless of your population, which again is indicative of the New Jersey plan. So you're merging these two plans together into the Connecticut or Great Compromise, and that is the structure that we know today with the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, it is important where you might want to get really bogged down in the nitty-gritty details, but with AP Gov, you really just need to be familiar with the plans. You don't need to necessarily be familiar with the intricate components. So just be aware of that when you're looking at the level of detail. Now, the problem is with representation, especially in the South, do you count the slaves? The North would undoubtedly say, absolutely not. You don't give them rights. They can't vote. They can't do really anything. So the North is arguing that they should not be counted, but the South is undoubtedly we're arguing that they should be. And in order to get the South to eventually ratify this new constitution, they agree agree on, rather, the 3/5 compromise, where slaves will be counted as 3/5 of a person when you're looking at the total population. It doesn't mean this gives them any more rights. They're still slaves at the end of the day. But when it comes back down to representation, they're going to be counted as 3/5 of a person. And then the final question of equality is, what are the voting requirements? Who is allowed to vote? Is it based on property? Is it based on age? And the founding fathers were smart enough to say, you know what, we're probably not going to get consensus on this, so we're going to leave that up to each individual state to determine. So they leave this final topic alone and allow the states to determine the voting qualifications, which even today, to some extent, do vary with respect to voting ID laws, or can felons vote. So that is very much a state issue even today. Now, when we look again here with respect to the issues of equality, here you're going to have the Connecticut Compromise, you have the 3/5 Compromise with respect to slavery, and then, of course, equality in voting, where the states are going to be deciding those qualifications. Now, with respect to economic issues, remember the Articles of Confederation were just absolutely terrible when it came to economic issues. You had states that were imposing tariffs. You had states coining their own currency. So if you're going to New York, you better have your New York money. Or if you're going to New Jersey, you better have your New Jersey money ready. Also, remember, Congress can't tax. So if you can't tax, you can't really do anything. So what the founding fathers are going to do, they're going to take the powers of the Congress and they're going to make them infinitely stronger when compared to the Articles of Confederation. At the same time, this is going to take power away from the states as well. This is what states such as Rhode Island and New Jersey would certainly be fearful of, because again, they are smaller states. They want to have some control in their affairs, especially in the national government. But in order for the nation to operate as a country, this had to be done according to the founding fathers. So some of the things that are going to be added to the powers of Congress, whether they can levy taxes, they can borrow money, they can punish counterfeiting, they can coin money. That's really big, to have a uniform currency. I mean, just imagine the logistics of that would be really difficult. They're also going to put some restrictions on the states. For example, they cannot coin or issue paper money. States cannot tax imports. So if you're getting imports from, let's say, New York coming into New Jersey, this means New Jersey cannot tax New York and vice versa. And then other key provisions that you may want to just be familiar with. For example, the new government assumes the national debt contracted under the Articles of Confederation, that of course being important. And the Constitution also guaranteeing a republican form of government with your representatives. So keep that in mind. Now, there are individual rights that are going to be guaranteed in the Constitution to somewhat alleviate the states, the fear that you're going to have this burdensome national government. I'll name some of these. You see several here amongst others. For example, a right to a trial by jury. You also have no ex post facto laws, meaning that laws cannot be passed after the fact. So if you commit, if you do an action and then 10 days later they make that action illegal, they can't arrest you for that. So you can't do that after the fact. You also cannot have any bills of attainder, where you would declare a person guilty of a crime without a trial. So you are guaranteed a trial. Now, at this point, it is important to note that you have no Bill of Rights. So freedom of speech and expression, also rights of the accused, are not guaranteed. And that's where you're going to eventually see the Bill of Rights come about when we look at this issue of ratification. Anti-federalists, who we'll talk about a little bit later, certainly do not believe this Constitution goes far enough into protecting both the states as well as individual people. So that's going to be one of the main concerns. But before we get to that in part 3, really what we're going to see is this Madisonian model, and where Madison is going to present this model of government where you're going to have limited majority control, you're going to have separation of powers, creation of checks and balances to prevent one branch from overtaking another branch, and then also establishing a federal system where you're going to be sharing powers between the national governments and the state. The whole idea of the Madisonian model is to prevent tyranny, to prevent one branch or one person from accumulating too much power. That this structure would, in an essence, would prevent one faction from gaining too much power, as we talked about as being one of the main topics discussed at the Constitutional Convention. And you see, just for example here, that if you're going to look at the president in terms of nominations to the judicial branch, well, this has to be confirmed by the Senate. When you look at the voters, they have a major role in the electoral process in that they elect people to the state legislators. They also have direct control of the House of Representatives at this time. So this was a model that was sought to prevent, again, one branch or one person from accumulating too much power. So again, even if you're just looking at the separation of powers here, you see that many of the branches are dependent upon one another in a way that ensures that no tyranny can exist. Okay, so in our constitutional republic that's going to be established, republic, of course, being a form of government in which the people select representatives to govern them and make laws. Again, this is what a democratic republic looks like. This is not a true democracy because, again, in a true democracy, you would have no politicians and the people would vote on every single bill and every single proposed change. What you're going to see in the Constitution is that it's going to favor the status quo, that you cannot break out immediate change. That change is very gradual. It is purposely done slowly to prevent any radical reaction. If you look at the amendment process, which will be a later topic of discussion, it's almost nearly impossible. There are only 27 amendments in our Constitution, and the first 10 were the Bill of Rights in the 1790s. So if you keep that in mind, in the time that we've evolved, only 17 additional amendments, that's really not a lot. And amendments typically are always proposed, but most of the time, and almost all the time, they're going to essentially fail. Now, the final step after the Constitutional Convention is finished and the document of our Constitution that we know today was drafted, you have to have the state legislatures approve it in the terms of ratification for it to become the Constitution that we know today. So that's going to be another challenge that we're going to be looking at in an additional video where we'll see anti-federalists pitted against federalists. Okay, a quick review question. Read this quote in front of you and then read the choices below and put it on pause and I'll reveal it in just a moment. All right, and this is a fantastic quote. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. I mean, just think about that. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. So, referring to the above quote, which of the following fundamental principles does this statement best reflect? Well, if you selected separation of powers, you would be correct. This is very much indicative of the Madisonian Model, where you're going to prevent factions from overtaking and sort of counteracting people's self-interest. It would not be federalism. Federalism deals with the national government versus the states. We don't really see anything about property so much. A representative government isn't necessarily going to counteract ambition that much. And then Rousseau's view of human nature doesn't necessarily align there. So the best answer here is separation of powers, because Madison believed that this would be the most effective way to prevent and counteract self-ambition. So if you got that, congratulations to you.